Shaw, the former president Igor Dodon, and current president Maya Sandu, and the Russian TV channels Sputnik and RT, and the Kremlin. I think that's everything. That's oh yeah, and the breakaway region of Transnistria. Ready? Yeah? Okay. So, hello everybody. The subject of this speech will be Russian disinformation campaigns in Moldova, and it's based on a report that I recently read by the European Parliament. The issue of Russia's possible influence on the political discourse in various countries has received a lot of attention over the past few years, especially in the context of the 2016 American election and the 2016 UK Brexit referendum, in which it's thought that Russia played a role in promoting certain narratives to influence the outcome. In this speech, I'll look at one of the most intense cases of Russia's use of so-called active measures, which is a term that dates back to the early days of the Soviet Union to denote Soviet and later Russian espionage, propaganda, sabotage and assassination operations overseas. All of this over the past 2 years has been occurring in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In the first quarter of 2022, the Russian government spent 322% more on state mass media than in the same quarter of the previous year, 2021. These campaigns target a wide range of countries, but there is a particular focus on the countries of the Eastern Partnership, of which Moldova is a key battleground for this kind of hybrid warfare. Although Moldova in 2023 was granted EU candidate status alongside Ukraine, the Kremlin still sees an opportunity to sort of deflect Moldova from its path towards further integration with the West and the EU. The Moldovan case can also help to shine a light on the ways in which Russian disinformation functions and how Russia is pursuing a strategy aimed at maintaining its sway over key neighbouring countries that it believes fall within its so-called historical sphere of influence. In terms of disinformation, the Russian playbook uses an array of interlinked tactics and actors to spread targeted disinformation narratives that are aimed at provoking certain psychological effects among the target population. For the Kremlin, disinformation is a sort of politics by other means, a way to win over the hearts and minds of a given population through methods that are often described as psychological warfare. The Russian approach to propaganda naturally builds on the Soviet legacy, in which the various security services had developed a systematic approach to disinformation. However, it also takes lessons from the American use of information and Russia's own experience in Georgia and Chechnya, and with the so-called colour revolutions that occurred in a number of surrounding countries over the past few decades. A key aspect of this strategy is the use of technology to influence information networks. Overall, there are two aspects to Russia's strategy. The technical aspect, which targets the systems through which information flows, and the psychological aspect, which aims to influence the mindset of both civilians and government officials. So firstly, the technical aspects. Information warfare through the internet and social media has a number of attractions and advantages. It's very cost effective. It allows key goals to be achieved without huge expenditure. It can also help compensate for the asymmetry of resources between Moscow and its opponents and create a so-called sort of level playing field. It's also very easy for it to pass undetected, and this makes it much more difficult to counter. It's very difficult, for example, in the case of Facebook bots and fake news, to know what a particular person saw on their Facebook feed at any one particular time. The psychological consequences can also be quite difficult to spot, which frequently delays the target's capacity to create an effective and timely response to this. It's also very difficult to trace the source of the activity, particularly in the case of trolling or bot campaigns, in which Russia uses online anonymity to make attributing the attacks or the activity much more difficult. So it's very difficult for countries to know what country, for example, certain bot activity came from. And finally, it's quite easy to use online disinformation as a weapon. Anyone can create a fake news article in, half an hour and publish it on the internet, and it's very difficult to spot if it's real, and these kind of tactics draw on existing social media algorithms, infrastructure, and particularly in certain countries, a lack of regulation of the online and the digital space. So, to come to the specific focus of this speech, the country of Moldova. The Russian invasion of Ukraine was a watershed moment for the country. It has a population of just 2.6 million, and it has had to contend with a huge influx of Ukrainian refugees into the country, and Russian missiles crossing its airspace, and a whole load of other issues relating to the invasion. And against this backdrop, there's been a radicalization of the whole information space in the country. For decades, the Kremlin has been using a whole range of tools to interfere in Moldova's domestic affairs, and its aims are threefold: to preserve the status quo, to undermine Moldova's integration with Western institutions, such as the EU and NATO, and to protect Russia's economic interests and the economic interests of its elites. Narratives pushed by Russia seek to confuse the public and distract them from the war in Ukraine, instead trying to draw the focus onto issues such as Moldova's supposed loss of sovereignty, the alleged imminent collapse of the West, and the harm that economic sanctions have caused to Russia. It makes use of pre-existing vulnerabilities in the country, such as fragile institutions, endemic corruption, and sorry, I've scrolled by accident. And it seeks to erode already low levels of trust in politics. Moldova's proximity to Ukraine is also another key vulnerability that can be exploited, with the fear of the country being inundated by Ukrainian refugees, or the war spilling over into Moldova. Some examples of fake articles shared online include warnings that there's imminently going to be conscription, drafting into the Moldovan army to fight in a war, or that diplomats are being evacuated from the country. And one particular fake article purported to show, angry and threatening Ukrainian refugees being violent, protesting on the streets, and claimed that each immigrant that comes to the country was going to be allocated a monthly allowance equivalent to about 750 euros, which, as you can imagine, provoked anger among a lot of Moldovans who are, barely struggling to stay above the poverty line, that other people are coming to their country and, getting what they believe should be their resources. The Kremlin has further exploited the country's already difficult economic situation. This economic situation has been characterized by really significant inflation and skyrocketing energy and fuel prices. And the Kremlin has suggested that soon there's going to be no more currency available in the country, or that there's going to be very severe fuel shortages. And this information was widely shared and even prompted government officials to step in and reassure the population that it was going to be okay. there's going to be stability, these things aren't true. And Russia also finally exploits the ethnic and linguistic divides in the country. The whole sort of Balkan region is kind of an ethnic patchwork with enclaves and minorities of different peoples in different countries, and so throughout the region it's quite easy to exploit these kind of linguistic, ethnic, cultural minorities. And in this case it particularly relates to the historical region of Transnistria, which is a sort of relic of the Soviet Union that was left over, that is allied with Russia, that talks about breaking away and becoming independent or joining Russia, and which is host to 1,200 Russian peacekeeping, in inverted commas, troops. Russia also relies on its links with various key players, such as politicians, cultural organisations, traditional media, but also alternative media and the Moldovan Orthodox Church, since the two countries share a religion, to spread its narratives. There are a number of elite groups, such as oligarchs and local politicians, that benefit from this socio-political divide. To take the case of former President Igor Dodon and his Socialist Party, they've long since been a channel for Russian interest through their long-standing opposition to any kind of rapprochement, becoming closer to the West. And he's been posting a lot of videos on Facebook hinting that the Ukrainian military is going to enter Transnistria, all sorts of things are going to happen. And there's additionally the case of Ilan Shor, who is a Moldovan businessman who he fled the country after being, and after he fled the country, he was sentenced in absentia to the theft of close to $1 billion from Moldovan banks in 2014. But from abroad, he continues to bankroll some alternative media channels and promote content on social media and stage opposition protests. And despite the fact that he's a convicted criminal who doesn't even, can't even come to the country, polls have shown that if there were to be an election tomorrow in the parliament, his party would win 16% at the polls. So there's also a network of organisations and media outlets that distribute Russian narratives. These include, for example, the Russian-financed Russian World Foundation, which is supposedly a cultural institute that promotes, culture, language, education, but also serves to promote Russian narratives. And there's a whole range of civil society organisations, such as a women's association, a youth group, religious associations as well, and also a number of online news sites on all the different social media platforms, TikTok, Facebook, Telegram channels, and also paid influencers who are posting content or who are commenting on other people's content without making it clear that they're being paid to do this or that they're promoting a foreign country's interests. So, to come to the next part of my speech, in terms of the Moldovan government's response and countermeasures, the war in Ukraine has really emboldened the country to go further in aligning itself with the West and adopting a more assertive stance towards Russia. So combating these hybrid threats posed by Russia has become a key priority, and Moldova has really ramped up its efforts to strengthen information security. The country has a pre-existing audiovisual council that has been entrusted with new powers to control and take measures against media channels that do not respect the legislation in force, which has also been recently strengthened and updated to help with this. And they've actually recently suspended a number of channels who were broadcasting Russian TV programs. The vast majority of the population, just for information, of Moldova is bilingual in Romanian and Russian, so it's very easy for Russia to be able to broadcast their own programming without having to translate it. The Russian-run news outlets Sputnik and RT have recently been completely blocked in the country for not following the new rules. However, a number of journalists who previously worked for these channels have been able to keep their press accreditation, and so they've just popped up on different platforms with, you know, YouTube channels, Telegram channels, etc. So it's really hard to counter the narratives that they're spreading. Though the government, the current government of Maya Sandu, has introduced these measures, the government is really struggling to put up a united front in this, and also the future of these measures and of this whole fight will depend on coming elections. There's some elections taking place this year and some next year in 2025 as well, so it will really depend on who ends up in power, on how these measures and how this legislation will continue to evolve, and whether it will remain in force at all. So in conclusion, Moldova's future is really marked by uncertainty at this point. The country is facing a wide range of really pressing issues, including a deteriorating economic situation and social and political instability. The country's foreign policy continues to generate a lot of controversy and divisions in society, which are then exploited by the Russian government and the Russian elites to promote an anti-Western, anti-Ukraine narrative. These narratives particularly find resonance among the most economically vulnerable sectors of society and among those with historical and cultural ties to Russia. And the dissemination of information uses both traditional media and social media platforms, as well as civil society organizations, and all of this amplifies Russian-generated content and has a direct impact on both Moldovan domestic politics and foreign policy. So the future of this issue will depend on the ability of pro-Western parties and alliances to prevent a united front in the coming elections and make gains here, but also to secure external support in countering disinformation campaigns. European efforts to assist with this will really be key here, and given the repercussions of disinformation, it's in the EU's interest to work on maintaining political stability in Moldova and particularly safeguarding its own image to avoid derailing any further attempts at integration. Addressing the multifaceted challenges posed by disinformation are crucial if Moldova wants to continue to pursue this path towards a more stable, a more prosperous future, and to continue to strengthen its ties to the West and the EU. So thank you for your attention.